G'day and welcome to another episode of In the Groove. I'm Garrick from Studio Vintage Guitars, joined today by David Ward, musician, www.davidwardmusician.com.
Cool.
And today we're taking a look at Muddy Waters' Folk Singer, the album, but also a little bit more of a journey of Muddy Waters in his journey from Delta blues singer to Chicago blues, father of the Chicago blues and a bit of a blues legend. And of course today is brought to you in conjunction with our good friends over at www.onvinyl.co.nz, where you can find a great curated range of new and used vinyl. Last week we were talking about Robert Johnson and that pivotal kind of recording, King of the Delta Blues Singers, that was released in 1961. Today we're going to talk about Muddy Waters and this Folk Singer album which came out in 1964. But there's a little bit of a back history to Muddy Waters. He was down in the Mississippi Delta. He was first recorded, I think, in 1941 by Mr. Lomax, who was out there doing his field recordings. But then he moved to Chicago in 1943 as part of the great migration of urban black folk who, due to industrialisation, all the work was drying up on the farms, and there was a sort of a mass migration up to the cities. And I think Muddy joined in on that, seeking perhaps fame and fortune.
Yeah, well, I think he saw that Lomax recording kind of as a way to get out.
Yeah,
get out of that sort of that
cycle of
hard
life
of that, like working on a sharecropping kind of situation.
Yeah, and so he migrated up to Chicago and found a life up there where there was a lot of musical stuff going on, right? There was a lot of street music, a lot of busking, a lot of bars, a lot of musical things happening. And Muddy went up there, and as an acoustic blues musician, there's some challenges in getting heard amongst all that noise, right?
Yeah, he said, I think pretty soon after he got there, he was like, look, if I'm going to be playing in these bars, nobody's going to hear this guitar. I need to get electric,
Yeah, so Muddy Waters, described as the father of Chicago blues, picked up the electric guitar and started playing blues with accompanying musicians on bass and drum and really at the forefront of creating that blues sound that we really know and recognise today as kind of a pivotal sound of the blues, and that really persisted throughout the 50s and into the 60s. And what actually behind this album, Folk Singer, obviously there was a big folk revival movement amongst the urban white kids, I guess, at the time, and I think Chess Records were like, hey, look, let's take Muddy Waters and show them what real folk music's like, and bring something out in an acoustic format that might resonate with them while they're all interested in this. So that was a part of the reasoning behind why this album came out, and it was a roaring success. It's really sparse in its instrumentation. It's a masterpiece of engineering, and it's an audiophile standard to this day. And it became very influential, and I think that's why we've chosen it today, because it's an influential album, because it's an absolute incredible piece of recording when you listen to it. Yeah. So what we were going to have a little listen to was some of that journey from the Mississippi Delta up to the Chicago, the pivotal moments of this album in particular. And I was going to start that off with listening to so Alan Lomax. He was travelling around, as we talked about last week, making field recordings of all these musicians, blues musicians, all sorts of music that he could find. He was kind of obsessed with it, and it all became part of the Library of Congress recordings that were stored there.
Smithsonian.
Yeah, so
apparently he was trying to look for Robert Johnson, and he didn't realise that he hadn't heard the news that he was dead.
Yeah, he was dead.
But he was looking for that. He was looking for the authentic kind of thing.
And part of this little album here, which is Muddy Waters, I think the Plantation recordings, is interviews with Lomax and Muddy Waters. Muddy Waters, a young man and that's really interesting to go back and hear that kind of that interview process, that story, and Lomax is asking him, where'd you learn this from? How did you write that song? Did you know Robert Johnson? Where did you learn that? Oh, Son House. Oh, did you what was Son House like as a guitar player? Who was better? Very interesting thing to kind of just put yourself in that moment, in that room in 1941.
I love recordings, even if it's not like an interview where you hear before and after takes of what the musicians are actually saying.
Yeah. I mean, it really gives a real perspective to that point in time. So here's a song called IB's Troubled from the Plantation recordings, which will evolve over time, and we'll just have a bit of a listen to that now. So Muddy Waters on slide guitar.
Like I feel today, I'm gonna pack my suitcase.
Awesome, mate. It's so raw. So that's just so raw and so kind of pure, and it's really polished. Given that it's possible that Lomax has turned up on the doorstep or without very much notice had come and
it seems like it.
Set up to record him.
Well, Muddy Waters, he said that Alan Lomax played him back the recording, and it blew kind of Muddy Waters' mind. He was like, I can sing. He's never heard his voice before, from the outside.
Yeah.
And that was that point when he realised, I could do this thing. This is, I could actually get out of here. I can.
Yeah, I can get out and pursue a life. So that was this really, it's a really great album to have a listen to if you want to kind of get that kind of the end of that Delta blues area before everything kind of changes, and Muddy Waters, heads on up to Chicago. And so the next point is we come to Chicago and he meets up with the guys behind Chess Records, and I think this might be one of the very first, if not the first, recording that he puts out on Chess, and it became a bit of a success. And it's actually pretty much the same song. It's called I Can't Be Satisfied, but all the riffs and everything are the same. But this time Muddy Waters has gone electric, and there's a bit of a backing band in there, and you can kind of hear that proto-Chicago blues sound coming.
So this is 1948?
Yeah, this is 1948.
So he moved to Chicago in 1943.
Yeah, so he's been there for 5 years, and I think this is kind of his first hit. That real country beat sort of bass behind it.
Well, I'm gonna wait till late. Won't be back no more. Going back down south, child, don't you walk. Woman, I'm trouble. I be all good now.
It's got such an amazing voice, so many different tonalities to it. It's just.
Oh yeah, totally. Particularly on this album, where he's just that voice is so front and centre. That was what blowing my mind. Just the range and kind of of his voice.
And so from what I understand, he was a career musician. He was living life, just playing, playing as much music as he can, playing the clubs, playing originally out on the street corners, but now it's starting to get a bit of momentum and recording some albums, and over the next, I guess, decade, really refined that. That Chicago blues sound really became a thing, and a whole lot of recordings come out. He's really got this electric guitar thing down packed. The band's expanded.
Were there many people at that stage that were putting bass and drums behind kind of blues? Because he talks about kind of, or maybe he wasn't the only one, but he was like I put the beat behind it and the bass, and I wanted this kind of driving sound.
This kind of sound. So he's still got that kind of, you can hear there, it's still got that exact same Mississippi Delta sound, but it's been crunched up a little bit on the electric guitar, and then it's got that bass and drum beat behind it. And obviously over the next decade, you've got a string of albums coming out where the electric guitar is sort of front and centre. Muddy Waters is getting fame. He's he's playing in the clubs, and the clubs are full of kind of energy. They're really raw. They're full of he's a bit of a womanizer, I think, when you look back and see you see some of the interviews with family members
and the various girlfriends and
mothers
of the children,
children. But yeah, so this whole decade he's become a bit of an icon, and then by 1960 we've got the this folk movement starting to happen in the your Bob Dylans and all of your other kind of artists coming through playing acoustically, and the Newport Jazz Festival, the Newport Folk Festival, is a kind of an iconic place for artists to come out and be seen there, and so you get a string of artists playing at the Newport festivals, like John Hurt, and Muddy Waters plays the Newport Jazz Festival in 1960, and that's another great album that really showcases that kind of what's happened in that decade that he's been in Chicago. And it's full of it's quite a big band kind of arrangement in the sense that all of a sudden you've got you've got your bass, you've got your drums, you've got a whole lot of stuff going on.
You got backup singers and
backup singers. And I've got my Mojo Working, which is a very famous Muddy Waters song, live at the Newport Jazz Festival from 1960 on a great album. You've got piano in there, harmonica. Full of energy, right? It's high, fast-paced, it's energetic.
So this is in the 60s, but
1960s,
But there were some people interviewing him about him in the 40s, like being in Chicago and just like that. He had that kind of, he sort of brought that kind of pep and that kind of jump to the music that wasn't really people were doing.
Yeah. So just so much energy, right? So you've got an album that's full, this live album, it's a classic live album full of these, these amazing, iconic Muddy Waters tracks. And until this point, that's kind of the direction that blues has been heading in. And in the 1960s, you get this kind of, I think Chess Records had been really on the forefront of everything, during the 1950s, Chuck Berry, Muddy Waters, a whole lot of blues stuff. And I think in the 60s they kind of went off the boil a little bit by some accounts, and started releasing some kind of wacky stuff. And you've got Electric Mud in 1968 where they're trying to make Muddy Waters psychedelic.
Does it say Muddy Waters was got like sort of fuzz tones on the guitar and kind of it's a lot more sort of
it's almost
verging on funk or something?
Yeah, it's kind of it's a little bit and it's a good album, but it's not the it's not what purists would call the real Muddy Waters, but it's got all this psychedelic element to it. But in 1964 they released this album, this folk singer album, and it's it's basic. It's Muddy Waters. There's Willie Dixon on the Willie Dixon on the double bass. We've got
Buddy Guy.
Yeah, Buddy Guy, a really young Buddy Guy playing guitar, and he's playing an archtop guitar. Obviously, Muddy Waters is in there. He's playing what I understood to be a Martin 0018 guitar at the time, and Clifton James on the drums.
But some of them are just like duos between him and Buddy, and then there's some with the kind of the full band, right?
Yeah, that's right. I find it's a little bit at times I'm trying to figure out who's playing which guitar part, but it's an amazing piece of recording in that it's all analog, it's warm, it's got this incredible sound stage. It's simple, but it just like it's all encompassing. The arrangements are just brilliant, and it really captures that kind of that Delta blues essence that's been through a transitionary period, but then kind of being stripped back to just its bare elements, but with that bass and drum.
It's kind of ironic that he's kind of the guy who sort of brought in sort of electric blues.
Yeah.
And then they're like, hey, can you just strip it right back?
Can you just strip it back a bit, because we think there's a market for it.
But that recording, like I was just listening to it, and one thing that I was struck by was just like, how these days, like you talk about a beautiful recording, like that everything these days, like so many things are sort of compressed the hell out of things, and everything really kind of really flat, squashed.
Yes.
This, like he's like at some points he's just like right on the mic, just like barely whispering, and then he goes right up into a howl, and it's just like
the dynamic range
so
is
much
just,
space. It's huge.
Yeah. And I think this would have originally been released on mono, but certainly the recordings I've heard are very stereo, and that you've got quite a lot of separation of the instruments.
Yeah, nice.
When you're listening to them, and in fact, from an audiophile perspective, it's considered one of the greatest recordings, and it's been reissued several times in audiophile format. And we've got here the Analog Productions recording, and there's also a Mophie pressing. Both of them are double discs, 45 RPM. They've been taken directly from the master tapes, pressed out in one-step processes. They're very expensive to buy. I think several $100s at least, but they are incredible from a vinyl listening perspective.
Have they kind of remastered this stuff, or have they just gone in and tried to give it the best?
I think
kind of.
I don't think they have. I think they've taken the master tapes and just got them directly to vinyl as simply as they can. I'm not an expert on that part of the process, but they are phenomenal albums to listen to, and even if you're listening to the digital versions, you can really hear how fantastic the quality of the recordings are. So we'll play a little bit of the opening track there, which is My Home Is in the Delta, which kind of just gives you a real flavour for the classic Delta blues slide.
Well, my home's in the Delta, way out on that Bumpers Road. Now I'm leaving Chicago.
And volume up in the voice, huh?
And people I sure do hate to go.
So raw. And really filmed as, filmed as live, really. I mean, you can hear, there's a point there where you can sort of hear a pick, like kind of doing this on the side of a guitar, That
I was gonna say that was when I was listening in the car on the way over here. I was just like, if you were in a room with that kind of performance of that, it would just be, they would be, you'd hear a pin drop, right?
Yeah.
And then that's the way it's recorded. It's like all that energy is just like,
yeah, you can hear everything in the room, right?
And restrained and just doing, yeah.
How does that differ from how we might record something today?
I don't know. I guess there's a bit of these days, it's like everything, it seemed like things were moving much more to kind of separate kind of tracking of stuff and trying to isolate everything, but you can see these pictures, they're in just like one little kind of recording booth together, like with it like this, almost like this close to each other, right? And that's what it feels like when you listen to it,
and all played together, all tracked live.
There's no way you could with stuff like this, there's no way you could do it, or want to do it like separately, like you can hear the way Muddy is just articulating something, and then Buddy Guy, who's like a young dude at the time, he's playing beautifully, just answers it.
Yeah.
And then slips back into the background again and just comes forward, and it's like they're really feeling each other, right?
The call and response is just, it's just amazing, and it plays out so beautifully, doesn't it? The next track we were going to have a look at was the one that it'd have to be my favourite on the album, I think, and it's a little bit, I guess you call it problematic by modern standards. Originally recorded by, I can't remember his name, Willie somebody, and covered by, I think, everybody through to the Yardbirds, but it's Good Morning Little Schoolgirl. brushes on the drums.
No, I think it might be a step.
Good morning, little school
step.
girl. Good morning, little school girl.
But the drums are
And
doing
I'll
almost
go
nothing, and he's doing like
Yeah.
so much. It's just like
And I'll go home.
Beautiful big upright bass sound. And obviously that's a song that really reflects a whole tradition of kind of this trope about the schoolgirl or young girls that has been prominent in blues music and rock and roll, all the way through, and yet with our modern kind of lens on it, it's almost like a taboo subject. Like
it's a bit so leery, isn't it? But
well, it's very leery, and it's it deals with, you're talking about all these things like consent and all of this kind of stuff. But when you kind of step back in time, you realise how raw this music was in the way it dealt with emotional stuff. We look at the Robert Johnson stuff; it's full of kind of sexual tension and energy. These shows were full of that kind of promiscuity that we know that Muddy Waters was prone to. And we've evolved as the music's evolved over time to kind of look at that differently now. But I don't think we can say, hey, we can't ever play that kind of music. We've got to listen to it and put it into context and say, well, we've come a long way. People have come a long way. But yeah, I mean, you've still got that kind of thing going on. Bruce Springsteen and it's still going on in the 80s and potentially even into the 90s.
Yeah.
There's a great guy on Instagram I follow who's he does the whole series of them where he's sort of got a wig on and he's being the artist sort of singing, and then it cuts to him being the sort of the mixing engineer or the producer. And then he's sitting there getting into it, and then the guy sings the first line that's sort of problematic, and he's the engineer just going, oh, what are you doing? But that's the thing. It's just the history of music is just full of this kind of this young, this kind of stuff. And you can't kind of isolate that from the music. I think.
Well, you can't really Muddy Waters. You can't really separate the sex from him, because he's just so goddamn, when he sings.
Oh yeah, he's just so goddamn sexy,
and he's obviously like a very passionate man.
Very passionate man. Was it Bonnie Raitt, I think? And she I saw some interviews with her saying, "Wow, he could have me any old time. I just love him so much. He's just so sexy." kind of. Well, it is what it is. So that's a great track that I really like on the record, and it's just got this beautiful guitar work, beautiful arrangement. And then lastly, the track Country Boy, which I think you highlighted, David, was beautiful sort of unison guitar.
Don't say I don't love you, because I stays out all night long. Don't say I don't love you, because I stays out all night long.
With some more infidelity there, I think, in the in the sound, in the track. But yeah, just everything's so sparse there, isn't it? Like the drums and the bass are just, they're almost not there.
Yeah.
But they're there just enough to give it this kind of flavour.
It's interesting hearing like Buddy Guy being, because I associate him with being quite electric as well,
Yeah.
And quite also kind of, when you see those early recording like video of him, like quite a flamboyant, like he's like moving like James Brown, and he's like quite. But this is just like, hey, he's got this gig with Muddy Waters.
Yeah,
he's
and
this
he's so
young guy,
young. I mean,
there's
the photos in here of Buddy Guy, and he's like, I don't know if you won't be able to see that, but he's a young man. He's probably barely 20 in those photos, and he's playing an archtop guitar. And when I'm glad that because I was listening to it intensely the other day, and I thought, that tone, that sounds like an archtop guitar, but surely he's not playing an archtop guitar. It had been in the back of my mind, and I didn't think to kind of look inside the album, and you can see it.
Beautiful kind of round.
Yeah, that round kind of
full sound, eh?
Yeah, that kind of sound that you get, and it just complements so beautifully to what is supposedly that Martin 0018. It actually doesn't really look like one in the photos when we're looking here, because it's got a it looks a little bit different, but that's allegedly what he played on the album. So you were saying, like last week we were trying to imagine listening to Robert Johnson with fresh ears and try not to overlook it like we potentially had done in our youth. There are elements of this album that you think have that same kind of vibe to them.
Well, it's so sort of stripped back.
Yeah.
And in some ways it's like everyone's playing with such kind of restraint, like it's not.
Yeah.
And he's not doing sort of rock and roll here, but the energy is not right up front. It's just like really held back, and I think it was just, his voice is just so at the forefront. Everything's like supporting this like beautiful voice of his, and there's just like sometimes he's just humming and like growling and going right down, and then like leaping up, and it's just like everything's sort of supporting supporting that, and I just like I was thinking when I was listening to this on the way over that and listening to it, like he said, like when he was young he either wanted to be like a preacher or a musician, and because he was like interested, he wasn't cut out for the cloth, and he was playing the devil's music, like he was that, well, I guess I'm going to be a musician. And like when you listen to this recording and when you see him on stage and like later years, it feels like he's really preaching, right? And then that ecstatic thing where you see a preacher just getting sort of that sort of ecstatic experience, and just he can works the crowd, and it's just I
think he was chair-bound for a long time after he'd had a car accident in the late 60s, and you'd see him performing in concert where he'd be sitting down, but then he'd sort of be possessed to kind of stand up and dance around for a little bit before retiring back down. But in some ways this album is actually a polar opposite to that Robert Johnson album, because that was recorded on the fly in a hotel room. Terrible audio quality, scratchy recording, probably totally unrehearsed, very unscripted. The timings are all very different. And here we've got something that, we've got a guy who's gone back through a whole musical journey, back to his acoustic roots. He's had years of preparation. He's been playing for a long time. He's famous. He's got a band around him. He's got the best available recording tools, and you've got this production that's come out that's in some ways completely opposite. So from a listening experience point of view, this is probably a lot easier to listen to and appreciate than some ways in some of those early blues recordings that are scratchy and
just to the level of sound, like you could just bathe in that, like so. And sometimes when you're dealing with something that's really iconic, you can kind of accept a little bit of kind of crackliness or whatever. But then some of those other recordings, like I don't know, like I went back and I was listening to some like an early Skip James recording, and you can hear it there, but it does kind of get in the way, the kind of like the imperfections of the recording. And then those 60s recordings that they did of him, it's kind of a similar kind of fidelity, and it's just like you can hear. Nothing's getting in the way of just like experiencing. Yeah, well, there's
the Sun House one from the 60s as well, where they, and they brought these guys back and recorded them. It'd be great if we had a Robert Johnson one to kind of compare that to. But just like you can literally put this album on and just bask in it, right, and sort of lie back and kind of just really, really enjoy it. It's in some ways it's a really great desert island disc in that it's just so pure and so powerful.
You were saying there's beautiful kind of stereo. I mean, I'd love to listen to it with some really nice some headphones and just...
Yeah, well, I've got a tendency at the moment to take the, for In the Groove, take the vinyl recordings and actually record them onto tape, on cassette tape through a really high-end deck and with really good quality tapes. and then listen to them with headphones on, so I can, listen to them at my desk, and I know I can do that with a computer, but it's a little bit more focused, and you get quite a lot more of the analog warmth, and you get some of the imperfections that come with that. A little bit of tape hiss, a little bit of snap, crackle, and pop from the record. But yeah, the stereo imaging is just it's crazy. It's really intense, and it's. Yeah,
so they really figured it out by the sort of 64.
Yeah, definitely, and I guess that's probably the, I guess you've got the 70s great studio area, but that pinnacle of kind of analog, simple analog recording, the 1960s.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think just an absolutely fantastic album to get your head into, to listen to. This became again influential for the bands emerging across the pond, which is what we're going to be covering next week with the Blues Breakers album, quintessential British blues album. So until then, stay tuned, and thanks for joining us. Cheers.
Thank you.